Joe Biden recently proposed in an interview that he would support federal legislation to force states such as Florida, Texas, and Tennessee to allow doctors to perform hormone therapies and sex change operations on children. This is all under the rubric of a deeply misleading term, trans-affirming care, that has become a deep conviction on the political left. And I'd like to analyze the clip where Biden is talking about this and also show that for the left, the so-called trans child serves almost as a religious totem. Let's take a listen.
Transgender kids is a really harder thing. What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful. I mean, it's just terrible what they're doing. It's not like, a kid wakes up one morning and says, I decided I want to become a man, or I want to become a woman, or I want to change. I mean, what are they thinking about here? They're human beings. They love, they have feelings, they have inclinations that are, it just to me is, I don't know, it's cruel. And the way we do it is we make sure we pass legislation like we passed on same-sex marriage. You mess with that, you're breaking the law, and you're going to be held accountable.
So let's break that down. This sounds, in a certain sense, it sounds reasonable, it sounds humane, it sounds fairly rational and commonplace. But this is all based on manipulative language and a worldview that operates under the surface. And so first off, the kind of category, transgender kids, that's the first thing he says. He lays down the marker that that's what we're talking about. But as my friend and colleague Colin Wright has pointed out, there's no such thing as a transgender kid. And what he means by that is that a child is not innately transgender, but becomes transgender once the child enters the process of medicalization, hormones, surgeries, and other medical interventions. It's not that they cannot have feelings of discomfort or dysphoria. That's certainly true. But they only become, quote unquote, transgender when adults intervene. These are parents, doctors, psychotherapists, and then that child is put on Lupron, put on testosterone or estrogen, has the double mastectomy, or gets the penile inversion surgery. Biden then says, it's not as if kids wake up one morning and decide that they're transgender or decide that their identity is different than their biological birth. This is preposterous. That's exactly what's happening. We have reams of data that show this is a classic social contagion. If you look at the graph of young people identifying as transgender, it's like the tulip bulb panic. It's like a stock market bubble. This has to crash. This is not sustainable. It's not driven by a deeper reality. It's driven by these contagious social factors. And look, for most kids, if you listen to what Biden calls their feelings and inclinations, these are fleeting. They resolve on their own, especially as they're discovering perhaps new gender identities while they're going through the very difficult period of puberty. And all of this boils down to the third component, where Biden says that this is close to sinful. He's providing a religious judgment. He says that preventing kids from undergoing hormone therapies and surgeries is the sinful act. And so any prohibition against forcing kids on the path of medicalization is considered a violation of the basic worldview of the left. When again, this is a moral inversion. He has it exactly backwards. It's sinful to put kids on the path to permanent medicalization, to put kids on the path to irreversible surgeries, and especially at a moment when other nations are starting to turn against that kind of really unproven and deeply destructive medicine, Biden says, no, we're going to double down. Because the people who are running policy for the president, who showed no passion for these issues in the past, are telling him that this is how you put together the coalition, this is where the energy is, this is what you have to say and what you have to commit to. And so let's look at this. What is actually happening under the surface? What does this phenomenon mean? What does the ontological category of the transgender child suggest? I think that what it means at a deeper level, at an archetypal level, is that for the political left, the so-called trans child serves almost as a totem, for their political ideology. In primitive civilizations, the tribes of North America or the Aboriginal tribes in Australia used totems to connect with nature, to connect with past ancestors, and they had actual totems for male and female, for the masculine and the feminine, to create these categories of man and woman. Very primitive, very basic categories. In our modern civilization, we've turned this on its head. The political left is now using the totem of the trans child to connect with a metaphysics of the future, to say that any holding back from this scientific and medical future is a violation of our deepest principles. And they're creating a new totem beyond the categories of man and woman, beyond the categories of the masculine and the feminine. Because in this new metaphysics, they believe against Genesis. They believe against the idea that we've created a world in God's image, male and female. They believe that they can actually transcend all that. They believe there is a gender utopia beyond the basis of reality, beyond the basis of human nature, that if we can only yield scientific progress, apply it to the repressive categories of the patriarchy, we can unleash a trans utopia beyond the world of necessity. But this, true, of course, is a lie. Beyond the realm of the masculine and the feminine is not a utopia. It's a dystopia where man is stripped from his nature, forced into these brutal medical procedures, and then, as we're already seeing with detransitioners, really stripped of the basic building blocks of reality and human dignity. And at the end of this road, what we're seeing is that the political left is willing to engage in child sacrifice, removing the breasts of healthy young women. In some cases, we know this from the medical literature, actually castrating young boys, removing their penis and then turning it into what they call a neovagina, or an artificial vaginal cavity, which has just horrific medical consequences. And so, in a way almost kind of reminiscent of the Aztec child sacrifice rituals, we're castrating kids in service of a political ideology that uses them as totems to get humanity into the new left-wing metaphysics. It's something that we're going to see in the next few years, yielding horrific consequences, dystopian consequences. And because it's fundamentally at war with the reality of the universe, the reality of the human nature, it cannot stand. And so conservatives have to be tough. And even our friends on the left who are revolted by this ideology have to have the strength of conviction to know that it ultimately is going to backfire. And we cannot back down 1 inch because we have the moral high ground, we have the metaphysical high ground. And I know that in the future, despite the kind of folksy rhetoric of people like Joe Biden, we'll have the political high ground if we fight this fight on principle, we protect these kids from these experiments, and then we ultimately conform our politics to the basic nature of reality.